Thank you to Paolo de Buono. That is correct pronunciation of your name, correct? Or am I
Yes. Yes, that's great.
good? Good. I got on the first try. But thank you, Paolo, for coming on today to discuss the broader context of Catholic education in Ontario. This is coming off our episode last week, where we discussed the what happened in the York Catholic District School Board. And we wanted to have you on to discuss that because you sort of made a name for yourself criticizing at the time then York Catholic's pride flag debate. Um, and just give us a sense, what can you tell us, just to give our listeners some perspective. Tell us what happened there. What was that experience like for yourself?
Well, the I guess the highlight of the moment was when I was confronted by um, angry parents, and some were not even from York Region, in the lobby of that night when they were debating the pride flag. Um, when I was being called the devil incarnate, and that video that I shared on Twitter got 1 million views because it obviously uh, people saw that this is bad. But I experienced it directly, and it just showed how deep the homophobia is in the area. I've been asking the York Catholic Board since 2000. Formally, I asked them to fly the pride flag. I asked again in 2022, I believe, and then I tried to ask again in 2023. And they actually disallowed my presentation after first saying they were going to allow it because it contradicted to them their Catholic views.
Yeah, I mean, well, we'll probably get back into that later on in this discussion. But the reason why we did want to have you on was, and following up from last week's episode, so York Catholic is back in the news because of a pro-life right-wing organization was invited to a Catholic school in the board to give a very, let's say, graphic presentation, according to some students and teachers, about abortion, graphic images, verb, terminology, and those things. As a former, or I guess current Catholic teacher, can you give us a little insight into like how would this group be allowed to give this presentation? Because we found their website, just a quick Google search, and it's very adamant they are very much a political organization aimed at pro-life policies in Canada. They don't they're not pitching themselves as an educational uh, uh,
Hmm.
educational group. They're not educational advocates. They're a political group. So I'm wondering how would this group be allowed to present to a Catholic high school under the pretense of educational values?
Well, I just want to clarify that I am Catholic, but I'm no longer a Catholic teacher where I teach for a Catholic board. But I did for 10 years. I worked for the Toronto Catholic Board, and I was a parent in the York Catholic Board. And my experience is that there's, I think the word is deference. There's this implicit trust that teachers give to anything that's Catholic. And my experience is some of the weirdest, harshest things said were by a priest, by volunteers from the church in my classroom, for example, um, that were Catholic. And I think too many educators just trust that if it's Catholic, it's good. And that's probably what happened here. This is an organization that said it was Catholic, and the topic coincides with what that principal believed. Um, and they just said, "Go ahead, you're welcome." And they didn't do the required checks that an educator should do, because
Mhm.
an educator is ultimately responsible for what happens in their classroom if they're a teacher, and what happens in their school if they're a principal. And the persons in charge here at the York Catholic Board didn't do what they were supposed to do in advance.
Yeah, and it just we wanted to talk about it because it just seemed that especially at York Catholic, it seems a very stringent form of Catholicism has taken root there in our observation, and it's not just but this matter. I think they are one of the few last remaining Catholic boards in the province to still hold out on flying the pride flag. You yourself saw what was going on there. Is there something unique about York the York Catholic District School Board that makes it an outlier in this? Because the fact is, a lot the other Catholic boards, I believe the majority have come on board with flying the pride flag. This pro-life material wouldn't necessarily get into wouldn't be a presentation in front of the school kind of thing. And is there something unique about York Catholic that is that's happening there in your opinion?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I I'm guessing that this type of presentation does happen in other Catholic boards. And it may be that the students got the courage from last year's debate to stand up, and there's media attention. I think this happens throughout Ontario in Catholic boards, and students spoke out because this was wrong, and it got media attention because they had the attention last year from the pride flag issue. You know, when
Mhm.
York students speak out now, there are media members who are ready to listen, who understand there's something going on. But I will grant that York Catholic does stand out. It seems to be a little ultra right wing. Its its school board chair, the trustee from last year, Frank Alexander, seems to be very stringent against the pride flag, calling it evil, um, and worse. So there is I would say a special problem in York Catholic, but I'm not going to say that other Catholic boards are above their I'll call fundamentalism. It's still there. It's formally in the
Mhm.
in the curriculum, for example, which I'd love to talk about as well.
Well, we can definitely touch base with that as well. I mean, and in our coverage we start off with the Halton Catholic Pride Flag debate a few years ago, um, but this is kind of crept up throughout the different Catholic boards that there does seem to be a more of a hardline edge on. It started off with the Pride Flag, and it seems to have spilled over into other matters, particularly the abortion debate. Apparently now, I remember when I was in I'm a Catholic. I went to a through the Catholic system, and I don't remember this ever being a feature in schools. I don't remember this being a factor at play, and I'm wondering, as a former Catholic teacher, what's changed in the last 20 years that this is now this fight seems to pop up in every Catholic board in the province in some form or another.
Well, there is a rise of fundamentalism. There is a group called Campaign Life Coalition that has a
Hmm.
lot of influence in Ontario in Catholic boards, and they've become more outspoken, more visible in the last 10 years. I suggest that there's an element of fundamentalism in some principles, some leaders trying to assert that there's something different, unique about Catholic boards as well. So when something like this comes, they feel they have to jump on it and show that we're unique.
Hmm.
Uh, we're fighting for true Catholic values, as they see it. Um, I think that plays a factor in this.
And I'll agree with you on that. I have full disclosure. My kids are in the Catholic system as well. It's a long story of how we came to that decision, but I find that the parents on the ground aren't necessarily caring so much about the Catholicism. A lot of people have voice when I asked, like, why would you choose this school over the public option? One, it was the fact that this was an option exclusive for Catholics. If you're not a Catholic,
Right.
you don't get an option of two school boards, which I find is on the face of it, it tends to be very discriminatory. Um, but a lot of them say like the Catholicness of it, the religious aspect, it's nice, but it's not a mandatory thing. That's not the reason. A lot of it was the fact that they said the Catholic boards often get better funding. There's more funding per capita per student involved with it just through economics, and that's the reason why they opt for it. Uh, you know, my gut's telling me that there's a slow change from the public acceptance of Catholic schools in Ontario from what it was 20 years ago. Um, I find a lot of people, when you bring up the notion of should we just merge the two systems into one public funded system, Catholics don't get their back up against the wall as much as I think they would have maybe 20 years ago. Is that your perception, or am I unique in that right now?
Yes, I think you're correct about that, and that's my perception as well. That they were more defensive about it 20 years ago. I think the writing is on the wall that you know there's really there's no real reason to have a separate system. And I think and that's part of the fundamentalism because some people are trying to assert, why are we different? Why should we exist? And
Mhm.
they try to push those extra Catholic things that they might not have 20 years ago. Um, because in many ways, Catholic boards aren't different. Um, and they shouldn't be because they're as much as possible, except for some contradictions, are trying to you know, teach consistently with societal values, right?
Mhm.
Um, and 20 years ago, that included a general acceptance of abortion as a right. And, like you noticed, you didn't notice it in schools. Um, but, the Catholics, I'll give you an example of what's happening today. There's Campaign Life Coalition, and there's a related group called Life Site News.
Mhm.
They're actually working on a documentary to to say that Catholic boards aren't really Catholic, right?
How are they not really Catholic?
Well, because they're not Catholic enough, and they don't
Yeah.
teach
Well,
about abortion. They're flying the pride flag. They're um so on and so on. Those are the big two issues that
right.
stand out. So they're actually doing a documentary on that, and I was asked to be a part of it. So I just gave a short interview, and from my perspective, as much as what we just said, I think Catholic boards are still too Catholic. I don't think they should exist because they're still asserting things that contradict basic Ontario values. You
Can you
know,
could you give us an example of that?
well, one example is just the priesthood. Students see that the only leaders of the church are male.
Hmm.
And the message is that women are not good enough to be leaders. That's totally contradictory to Ontario values of equality of gender and sex. Um, so, to teach that a person can't become a priest because they're male and to be bombarded with this image. So it can't be a priest because they're female,
Hmm.
and to be bombarded by this image by the only priests at school masses visiting the schools are male just reinforces that. And that's just one example. The other example is, um, you know, I try to say it as clearly as simply as I can, but Catholic boards teach that it's a sin to be to us LGBTQI plus. They teach that it's a sin. Um, that's that's as fundamentally wrong as I can get when it comes to Ontario values.
Well, and that's I mean, that is something that is contradictory, is that how do you teach the simple fact that there are trans, queer, gay, lesbian students in walking in the hall statistically? I mean, I'm not going to out anyone, but statistically, you just know that in a high school of 1,000 to 2,000 students, statistically, they're going to be there. They might not be out or have come to terms with it themselves, and that's their right to do so. But um, yeah, I agree. Like the notion of, well, that is inherently sinful. It does go, and then I find it contradictory because any or pointless, because any Catholic, any of my Catholic former co-students, comrades in arms, so to speak, who we've all graduated, we've all gone off, we've lived our lives, careers, whatever have you. I keep in touch with the couple, and I say, hey, how's it going? Every now and again, and none of them are like foaming at the mouth, uh, uh, burn the trans flag. When the trans flag debate was happening, a lot of them were saying, yeah, it makes sense. There are students in this school. It should be an image that is showing that you're accepted here. It's safe for you to come to school. Same as that flags for other causes in the appropriate time of the year. It wasn't just, it was that. And I find that either that's a complete failure of Catholic schools, that ideology didn't take root, or maybe it's just the fact that we are growing more liberal, more progressive as a society on these matters. That I think people just say, yeah, this is as long as you're not harming anyone, do what you do. You're not, there is no harm to being gay, lesbian, trans, or questioning or whatever have you. As long as you're not
Mhm.
harming anyone, live your life. Great. Um, and I guess it comes down to the fact that, what is the role of Catholic schools in Ontario? Now, whenever I brought this up to Catholic educators or Catholic board members, it's always, well, it's constitutional. It's in the Constitution. We're entitled to have this. And I said, yeah, but it's just Ontario and Alberta are the only two provinces that have it. So are the other eight violating the Constitution? And also, I said, we're in 2024. This isn't 1867. We have Muslim, Jewish, atheists. We have religions of all over the globe rest somewhere in this province. So why don't they have special accommodated schools, to tax funded schools to begin with? It's more, I guess it's a question like, you must hear this as well. It's in the Constitution. We have rights to this school system. And I say, do you really? Because the rest of the country just say no.
Well, I'm just going to add, even Saskatchewan has Catholic schools, um, but Newfoundland and Labrador did, and
Right.
Quebec did, and they chose to get rid of it. It is possible. It takes political action, um, more than anything else, and it's the way that we should go in Canada, in Ontario. I look at it often this way. I understand from a historical point of view why in 1867 it was made a right.
Mhm.
But if you were to consider Canada, let's assume it was forming today and we were just coming up with a constitution today, it wouldn't make sense.
Right.
It would make sense to have two official languages and to have other things that are in the constitution like equality rights and so on. But no one would ever think it would be fair or prudent to have a right that one religion has a right to its own publicly funded schools where it can teach values that contradict societal values. Um, so that's part of the basis of moving forward on the issue of not having Catholic boards in Ontario, merging Catholic boards with non-Catholic boards. It's outdated, and it's the way of the future. And the longer we prolong it, we're just not being good with public policy in our public institutions.
I do question the longevity of support for it, because the other thing is, you walk into a Catholic church these days, and that place is empty. Um, I do question, like, I think we've moved past the era of where we identify necessarily on religious grounds, at least for Catholic and Protestant alignment. That's my sense in Canada, is that if you're Christian, you don't necessarily focus on the Catholic Protestant alignment. In fact, I doubt that if you identify as Christian per se, or at least a practicing one, is there a bit of a hypocrisy there of just we're holding on to this system that, like, I'll be honest, when I was a kid, when I was a kid and I went to elementary school, like, you would go to church on Sunday and you'd see kids from your school in the pews next to you. And that was kind of like, it was a whole, but you notice, like, there were kids that weren't there. And it was because their parents said, well, no, the school will teach the Catholic part for me. Like, they teach you all the sacraments and all the why you sit and stand and sing and all that stuff. It's all there. And it's like, isn't that just kind of hypocritical to say, well, the state should be teaching your kids how to practice your religion? Like,
Yeah, I do think it's hypocritical to a certain degree. You know, like you were saying before, I think the vast majority of persons aren't choosing a Catholic school because of the because they're fundamentally Catholic and they want to
mhm,
make sure that those views are there. They're choosing because it's the one near them. Um,
right.
they may be Catholic and they have this affinity towards it. Um, so I think, most parents in the Catholic system would have no difficulty with the idea of Catholic boards ending. The greatest hypocrisy that I see is, the founder of the Catholic religion of Christianity is known as Jesus. And his most fundamental teaching is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right?
That always gets left by the side somewhere.
So there you go. Catholics are asserting we have this right that you can have.
Mhm,
And that sense of we have something that you can have that we can't share is fundamentally contradictory to the basic belief in Christianity. And I've shared that as a Catholic, as a Christian, you know, I can see this idea of asserting and protecting a right that no one else has. That's not fair. It's discriminatory, and that's where I see the greatest hypocrisy in the idea of Catholics defending it.
mhm. I,
Besides it being outdated, it doesn't make any sense. I would understand Catholics, a century ago asserting why they should have a different system.
right. And in our last episode, we discussed, Roll and I were having a discussion on the broader sense of how public education is funded. And our take is that our take was that in the Catholic board, right wing uh, grassroots movements are trying to copy what they did in the States, and that
Yes.
it was uh, in the States decades ago, they got people kind of into the school boards, municipal level of governance, to kind of build up your bona fides, your credentials, and whatnot, and then that way you can springboard them into like a state government governance, or to the federal level, senator, congressperson, whatever have you. And I find that they're trying to copy that here in Canada. Start off at the school board level, municipal level, get some bona fides, then say, yeah, now go run for a conservative minded party or right wing minded party at the provincial or federal level. Um, and we also caveat that is the left is doing that in the public board as well. The far left. Is it about time we just depoliticize boards altogether? Because boards, in my mind, shouldn't be weighing in on this. A school board should not be weighing in on the sexual health of its students. We have a Ministry of Education that lays out curriculum. They say you teach sex ed this way, you teach math this way, you teach science this way. If we as a people don't like it, we can vote out the government and say we elect somebody else who will put a better curriculum in place for the entire province. But the idea is, 1+1 is taught the same in Thunder Bay as it is in Oakville,
Hmm.
uh, right? And instead of, and school boards really just about like making sure that, schools have new textbooks and a fresh coat of paint on the wall. And if we need to buy land to build a new school, we do that. It's really is an accounting job, in my opinion. Do we need to just get away from that? Should we just get away from the idea of elected school boards altogether and just go straight to like a more practical appointed board, like a municipal board that just says oversee the funding of this to make sure that teachers are paid, schools are funded, resources are being allocated properly in your jurisdiction.
Well, I haven't considered this question as deeply as I have other questions about school board governance. But obviously, this fundamentalism among in the Catholic boards, but you see it as well in public boards, right?
Yeah.
Because they're pushing candidates to run to mirror fundamentalist views. It obviously makes a bad case for the idea of elected trustees as running school boards. And I can see that there'd be some efficiency and less of this obstructionism um, from the trustee level to what the ministry is trying to do. That wouldn't be perfect because the ministry has challenges. Look at Doug Ford right now, who's saying that he wants to appoint judges who think like
Right.
he does, right? Well, is that we have challenges with a ministry run uh, school board system. But look, consider that school boards don't decide the curriculum. It's the ministry that does. And you're right that ultimately school boards are doing minimal decision making, and that's the way the system is designed right now.
Mhm.
But they sometimes use it in a way, like in Catholic boards, to to not fly the pride flag, to assert that we're different, we're unique. You can't tell us what to do. Um, that approach obviously makes it look bad for trustees. And I just want to add one thing that's unique about Catholic boards in the topic you brought up, sex education. You know, non-Catholic school boards teach the curriculum, the health and physical education curriculum, where you find the elementary level sex education expectations. But Catholic boards, in a way, don't. And they've come up with their own curriculum based on fundamentalism. They actually went through an exercise recently to come up with a new curriculum, a new sex ed curriculum, where they try to water down some of the harsh language from the previous one. They, but because of their fundamentalism, they still stuck to the harshness, I believe, the anti-2S LGBTQI plus beliefs. And and they show their fundamentalism because when you come up with a sex education curriculum, you get experts in public health, in science. They didn't. Their experts were theologians.
Right.
And
And that,
and that's part of the reason they messed up on what could have been a good revision of their curriculum.
well, there's one thing that you and I will know this for a fact, and but I don't think necessarily the general public might quite comprehend about the Catholic system is that the amount of power that the Catholic Church does hold over it, and by that I mean one, whenever a curriculum is brought in, it's brought to the local bishop, like whatever the diocese is affiliated with that said school board. They present to the bishop, and the bishop kind of goes, "Yes, I approve," and hands it off. And usually, the bishop's not going to deny. Oh, math, yeah, 1+1 = 2. Yeah, sure, sign off on it. But often, like these matters of like sex ed and whatnot, for some reason, that's where we really need to get involved with that.
Yeah.
Which I find the fact that of all organizations, the Catholic Church is the last one that should be educating anyone on matters of sexual health or reproductive rights, but we're not going to go there because we don't have time. But the other thing that I thought is incredibly wrong about it was the fact that if you're a teacher and you want to get hired, if you go to a Catholic school and say, "Can you hire me? I have all the credentials. I've got my degree. I've got my certifications and whatnot." It doesn't matter unless the priest signs off on it. And I've heard of stories anecdotally of teachers who they go down to talk with the priest and say, "Hey, I want to go work at this school. I need to get a letter from you. Can you give me a letter?" And the priest, of course, has to grill them on, what would you say to if a student came to you and said, I think I might be gay or lesbian or whatnot. And the teacher at their heart would say, just let's work through it. Talk, do you want to talk about it? Do you want to, let's work on it. I'll be there for you. But the priest is saying, no, you have to tell them that they're wrong and that their feelings are sinful and all that. And it's like, why would we let these people have a final say in the hiring of publicly funded teachers? And the
Exactly.
fact, and the simple fact that a teacher who is perfectly qualified in all manner of subject matter, you need to hire a math teacher, math or a science teacher, and you go to them and they say, "I'm perfectly capable of doing it, but I'm Muslim." And they can't be hired into a Catholic school. And I know people, well, why would you want to work at a Catholic school? Because that's what's hiring, right? Sometimes you just say, "I need a job," and that school doesn't have a science teacher. I know how to teach science,
Hmm.
right? Like, hire me. I don't have to go to the assemblies, but I can, it's science. It doesn't matter whether you're Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, atheist, whatever. Science is science. But they can't because they're Catholic. And I'm saying, like, I don't understand how this system can be held up this way for public tax dollars to allow this kind of discrimination from happening.
Yeah, it is discrimination. I mean, they're not only they're not sorry, they're not only denying non-Catholics who would be competent teachers from teaching, but there are good Catholics they would choose not to
Right.
hire because they are living in a same-sex marriage or relationship,
Or
right?
divorced in some
Or
cases.
divorce and a
Yes.
few other cases. And again, they don't differentiate on whether they're good people or not. They'll focus on those sex sins, that
Right.
their overemphasis on that. We started talking about abortion and about how, there's too much deference within Catholic education where they just give so much trust to religion, to their priests, to make those types of decisions. And you just hit it again with the hiring process.
Right.
Ultimately, it's the priest who decides who becomes a Catholic teacher, and that results in discrimination from a religious perspective on hiring good Catholics and hiring non-Catholics who would be great teachers. I mean, that's a fundamental reason why I think the Catholic system is inferior to non-Catholic systems, because we're not just hiring on merit, and the influence of the church has a negative impact. And I'm going to add as well a dangerous impact, because some of those sex issues, to teach that condoms are sinful
Mhm.
results in students getting hurt with diseases and so on, and other beliefs. So
That
it doesn't have a place. It shouldn't have a place in our public education system.
I yeah, and there's a growing trend I've noticed over the last few years, almost 10 years now, that I've kind of been involved more intimately, I guess, with the Catholic system, with children in it. And there seems to be a drive, at least from boards in this province, to kind of isolate themselves from the rest of the province. Like, it's not a matter of like, how do we make ourselves more ingrained in Ontario society. It does seem to be a matter of like, we've touched upon it before. It's like, we're special and we're unique. We have a right to this.
Mhm.
We are teaching a unique way of life here, and we need to isolate ourselves from the rest of Ontario because we're teaching better values. which on its face, I think is incredibly dangerous. Like my thoughts were always the public education is one of the great bedrocks of a great society. We have boys and girls coming out of our education system who are equipped to think critically and to not solve the problems of today, but the problems that haven't even been dreamt of yet. Um, is what our education system is supposed to be about, in my thoughts. Uh, but we have this Catholic system that seems to want to isolate themselves more and more away from, dare I say, mainstream Ontario. Uh, is that your sense as well, or am I just reading too much into the tea leaves on this one?
No, and we touched on that before. I mean, the some Catholic boards are trying to find this distinctiveness. What makes us
Right.
different? Why should we even exist in 2024? Um, and so they try to assert that that thing. I think some of them do it to keep uh enrollment. Um, I think at the high school level they try to encourage non-Catholics to attend as well,
Mhm.
and they're trying to attract more fundamentalist families to go this way. But again, it just to have a system that's more fundamental than society, fundamentalist than society is dangerous. And we've seen it in the York Catholic Board. The issue goes well beyond the pride flag, but that they can't even agree on the pride flag, it shows a lot. And I'm going to add with other boards, I'm thinking of the Ottawa Catholic Board where it was almost a unanimous decision. Even though other boards are flying the pride flag like Toronto and Halton, the decision was unanimous. It was a very divisive issue, and it still is. There are still teachers who have a problem with it, for example, um, and the administrators. So to have something so basic, so fundamental to accepting to us LGBTQI plus students and persons as flying the pride flag, to have that as such a divisive issue that they can't decide on, just shows how deep the problem is in Catholic boards, especially York.
It, it, yeah. I guess the sad thing is I don't see an end to these discussions happening. I don't find that these are isolated incidents as you said, and I don't know what. I mean, the only way I could see a Catholic system surviving in Ontario is a take the priesthood completely out of it, allow teachers to be hired based solely on merit, not on Catholicness, and to take out the prerequisite of being Catholic to join in. Because I know there are a lot of um, uh, non-Catholic parents who say, "I'm willing to suck it up and send my kid to it because it's got more resources. It has, again, it's the funding per student that everyone's looking at. They have more resources in them for my kid to thrive in." So I always said, people say, "Well, why do we need to make sure that?" Because it should be noted, enrollment across the province for Catholic schools is declining.
Yeah,
They're seeing a steady decline in enrollment year after year. So to say that they are mainstream is growing more and more um,
exactly. Yeah.
to the wise side. So I don't to the roadside. And I don't know if this trend continues. Like, are we going to be able to justify even keeping schools open when they're half full, but we have overflowing public schools, which really we should be trying to combine the two to offload the student demand there.
Almost every question you make, every statement you give, it just keeps emphasizing the fact that the idea of having Catholic boards is outdated.
Yeah.
This declining enrollment, for example, is partly because immigration in Canada has been increasing from areas that are not Catholic,
Yes.
you know, and that just happens because that's the way Canada is. So the fact that we have schools where, you know, the enrollment doesn't really reflect their community. It doesn't,
Right.
because you have for um immigrants from Asia. you have in Catholic boards, you have maybe a higher population from India, from the Philippines, but not from other countries.
Right.
You know, that's not the York region I live in, for
Right.
example, and the area you live in. Um, but that's the diversity. It's not really diversity, but that's the kind of diversity you get in a Catholic school. It's not reflective of the society. And I've been in Catholic schools in Toronto too, where about 90%, two elementary schools, where 90% of the students were Filipino Canadian, which is great. I'd love the experience, but I'm realizing this is not the community we live in.
In Toronto, yeah, that is not, it should be a little bit more colorful, a little bit more rounded. I agree with that because I mean when I went to Catholic school way back when I was a young kid, uh, it was very much very white. It was a very predominantly white Catholic school, and that was my entire life. And I thought, okay, I honestly thought, okay, this is what high school life is like. And then I went to university, and it was a slap in the face because I was exposed to everything in Canada. You had Asians, Africans, Caribbean background, just the whole gamut was there, and it was fantastic because you're like, wow, okay, where are you from? Oh, you're Muslim, you're Jewish, you're questioning. Who knows? But it was like I felt like this was actually Canada. This is what actually life is like, and we all got along. I mean, nobody we didn't it wasn't a big strength, but I was like I felt like I missed out on something in high school because I heard about their high school experiences. They're saying, oh yeah, we had this group of kids and they did this, or I was exposed to this lifestyle growing up. And I said, yeah, I kind of missed out on that. I did not have that in high school. And yeah, I mean, times are changing. I guess the question will be if at what point do our political leaders stand up and say, okay, times have to change. We need to make this work. Work differently, especially when we need to find money to keep the schools open. Uh, I don't see the point in just putting money into a Catholic system where schools might be only half full, where we have public boards that we're stacking portables on top of each other to meet enrollment standards.
You know, I think we're at the point, and you were right, maybe 20 years ago, there were Catholic educators who were more defensive, or the Catholic public was more defensive about having Catholic boards. But I think we're at the point now in Ontario that either party, conservative, progressive conservatives, the Liberal Party, the NDP, the Greens, Green Party of Ontario, if either of them or all of them went with a platform or policy saying that we're going to merge Catholic school boards, you're not going to get this overwhelming pushback from the public. You will get it from some of the fundamentalist Catholics,
Hmm.
but most parents will say, fine, as long as my children are going to a public school, which is what's going to happen with a merger, then I'm fine with it. Um, there is a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do because merging school boards, is a lot of work, and there will be some challenges to face. Um, an example is the Toronto board when the city merged from six small cities into the city of Toronto in 1997. The school boards had to merge, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy process, but the school board is an amazing school board today,
Hmm.
and there are efficiencies in it. I think that as a political position, that's where we need to go. We need to be telling our politicians, we're fine with it. We want you to lead us to an Ontario as it should be in 2024. One public education system, a French system, an English language system, but not this system where there's two in our area that are English, one Catholic, one non-Catholic. We can go there,
Hmm.
and we need to tell our politicians that we're ready for it.
I know people are worried about schools closing. Like, oh, are you going to close all the Catholic schools? Said, I don't see how because there's still the same amount of kids. and we're still going to need all
Exactly.
those teachers to teach them. So there'll be some closures, I'm sure, because there'll be that, it might be a public school that is really underpopulated, or a Catholic school that might be really underpopulated, and you say, okay, well, just take those kids and switch them over to the public. But the convenient thing is, a lot of times they're in the same neighborhood. I mean, in Ontario, you kind of built the Catholic and the public schools almost side by side, because the idea was just, oh, again, it's that redundancy of, oh, well, just the Catholic kids go to this school and the Protestant kids go to this school. And that was the way it was built 50 years ago. Nobody changed it, but the populations have greatly shifted. So it might be a matter of, you just take, okay, close a few portables in the public, shift more to the former Catholic school. Like, I think it'll all balance out in the end. It's just a matter
Oh,
of,
yes.
it'll be like
Yes.
maybe a year of just like, oh wait, okay, let's look at the numbers. Well, yeah, you just don't go to that building anymore. You go to this building, but you're still in the same neighborhood, and you'll probably have still a lot of the same friends. You're just gonna go to a different building. That's all. And by, and kids are resilient. They'll bounce back from it, and what have you.
Sure. And this could be done in such a simple way, for example, is letting students graduate from the school they're enrolled in and just starting fresh with the
Yeah,
next enrollment. Just you go to the nearest school.
yeah,
Um, the, there will be some closures, but not because there's less students and less teachers. Because in Ontario we have a class average that's set,
right,
right, and so that average will remain the same. That's how funding is based.
right,
But there will be, I would suggest even improvements in learning because, I've taught in small schools. Um, and it's not just because they're small, but with with that many, there was a there were too many combined classes, like grade 1, 2, grade
right,
3, 4. That's what you have to do in a small school. We have 300 students, um, and so you to make that class average fit, you have all these mixed classes, which are always a challenge to teach and to learn it.
right,
Um, so with efficiencies, you can have, you talked about schools where there's a public school and a Catholic school nearby, and sometimes they're at full capacity. Um, well, you can make one uh, uh, an elementary school, like grades 1 to 4, another one a middle school, and then you would get these amazing
right,
class averages. With the class average idea, you would get classes that are almost all straight grade 5, grade 6, grade, etc.
right,
So that would improve learning. Um, so you can have children who are in grade 1 go to this school, and when they reach grade 5 or 6, they go to that school. So
right.
a lot of schools will still stay open, but there would be efficiencies, and in some cases it would result in a few cases schools closing. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say it's going to be a panacea, but there'll be, part of my pun, maybe birthing pains that goes along with it, just working at the the format and the details. But I gotta believe also per capita, per student, funding
Exactly.
would increase over time, because just we don't have two boards that have to compete with each other. Everybody gets the same resources, uh,
Exactly.
and you see per capita student funding across, not just one, in the 905. I'm going to go Ontario wide, see that just increase, uh, giving our students better resources and better tools to improve themselves. I,
There's a
well, this,
study that says that we'd save over $1 billion with a merge system. So, Ontario will have the option of putting some of that money back into schools. So
and
funding can increase, sure.
see, okay, so that begs the question: why aren't the progressive conservatives jumping all over this? You're telling me you're going to save $1 billion tax dollars that could go either go back into the system or pay off the debt, or like, that just seems like a really conservative minded argument to do this, to just save $1 billion. Why not?
I don't know.
I know, and it's a rhetorical question. If you had that answer, I'm saying you should be running for office.
Well, it's interesting because one of the offsets, like most people would accept a merge system, and there would be just those few more on the fundamentalist side who would be upset about that. So you can see that there would be very, very small percentage of persons who would turn to private education, right? Private schools, if there
Yeah,
was a merger. Not many, but there would be some. And I noticed that among the progressive conservatives that they seem to have a political friendship with the private school system compared to the other boards. So you can see maybe that would be a reason for them. They're trying to help their friends,
maybe.
from my perspective.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a whole other episode that we don't have time for. Um, Paulo, this has been a fantastic conversation. I don't think it's going to be a conversation that's going to end anytime soon. But who knows what's going to come down the pipe. So we'd love to throw the door open for you to come back on to discuss this matter at some future date if you're up for it.
Certainly, I'll be there. Thanks for having me to discuss these important issues.
Thank you for talking about them so openly. Take care, and we'll talk with everyone on the next episode.